Wouldn't you love an all-expenses-paid trip all the way over to Paris, including top-tier meals and a night on the town? Or would you like a fully paid trip over to New York, including business class airfares and luxury accommodation? Or would you love to travel for free to see the grand final? Or travel for free to go and attend your friend's birthday party? Well, if your name happens to be Annika Wells, a minister in Albanese's government, then you're in luck, because you get this travel and more. Or if your name happens to be Don Farrell and you want to catch up with your family a couple of hundred times and not have to pay for these catch-ups, then you also happen to be in luck. Indeed, if you happen to be a politician in general, then you're in luck, because you can travel quite frequently and not have to pay. And not only that, you can do a reunion with your family and also not have to pay. Your family can come and visit you, but not only that, there are some other travel entitlements enabling you to go effectively on holiday with the rest of your family. Your family gets to travel business class and they don't have to pay. Who pays? The taxpayer pays. Such is the life of being a politician. And it's not just the Labour Party. If you think back a few years, the coalition had its own travel scandals. But of course, there was a little bit of a contrast. Bronwyn Bishop, who ran into Choppergate as it was called at the time, ultimately was forced aside as Speaker, and she had to reimburse the Parliament for some of her expenses. But it seems that Anthony Albanese and the government are standing behind Annika Wells and her travel. She's been referred all the way over to have her expenses looked at, but it appears she has broad support of the leadership team. Such is the life of being a minister in Anthony Albanese's government. There's a reason he's known as Airbus Albo, and it's not because of all of the prolific and frequent travel. It seemingly is because of his rather accommodated view of politicians' travel lurks. These travel rorts are really taking the mickey. It really appears the politicians are living large on our dime, while the budget is heading further and further into the red. Or the way that Jim Chalmers tries to express concern about balancing the books. We see politicians taking the piss, spending tons of our money, tons of taxpayers' money, on their own personal trips. And these trips might be either for holiday-related reasons, such as going and visiting the grand final, one might argue, or such as organising a notional work trip in air quotes to go where you have your friend's 40th birthday party. Or alternatively, if you happen to be our E-Karen, our E-Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman Grant, then you spend potentially $1 million of our money to go and raise your international profile on the international stage. Why the E-Karen or the E-Safety Commissioner is travelling internationally is beyond me. After all, the E-Karen should be monitoring what is happening in Australia. Indeed, I would argue the office should not even exist, but their job is monitoring what is happening in Australia, not lecturing the rest of the world. But it appears that E-Karen is willing to spend our money to go and do precisely that. We can all see that it doesn't benefit taxpayers, but it does benefit her by raising her profile so that when she leaves her job, she can line up a lucrative consulting or corporate gig. We can all see exactly what is happening here. And it is a problem, because the travel is becoming a bit of a rot. And the politicians are clearly taking the piss. And they're taking the piss at a time when there's a cost of living crisis. We're approaching Christmas, and many people, I'm sure, would love to go on holiday with their family, but either can't afford it or can't justify it. After all, prices have gone up, and people just can't afford to take holidays at the moment. But politicians seemingly can, because they're not the ones spending their own money, they're spending our money to go on these trips. And it is a concern. In fact, it is infuriating. You have the Anthony Albanese's government trying to hike taxes. They did Division 296, which was a tax hike. They reversed the Stage 3 tax cuts, which ultimately resulted in a tax hike relative to what was legislated before. And now Jim Chalmers is trying to hike capital gains tax through the capital gains tax review. All the while, they're trying to hike taxes, and they are screwing us with their expenditure. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg, because we can see what they're doing with travel. But do we really think it stops there? Or do you think they might be spending money in other ways that benefit themselves, but cost us. And the benefits themselves could be myriad and far reaching. For example, say a politician wants to pursue a personal pet cause. For example, they feel particularly passionate about something, whatever that thing happens to be, whether it's Indigenous rights or the environment. They feel particularly passionate about that. So they use their office to pursue their ideological goals, even if they don't benefit voters. Even if they don't benefit you and me, they benefit the politician by giving the politician the warm and fuzzies while spending our money. Indeed, I would argue that's exactly what Anthony Albanese did with the voice referendum, something that ultimately was defeated in every state and defeated nationally, with 60% of voters or thereabouts voting against it, and again, voting against it in every state. But still, he wasted millions of dollars of our money pursuing it. And I would argue that he did this because it made him feel warm and fuzzy and virtuous. And we can see this throughout government. And it isn't at all surprising. After all, there was a paper by Masoulis and Reza that showed exactly this type of thing in the corporate sector, where CEOs would use shareholders' money to pursue personal philanthropic causes, thereby securing the CEO's status within the trendy circles, so that when they go for drinks in trendy environments, they can feel all virtuous, but they're spending shareholders' money in a way that does not benefit shareholders. And that's just one example. There are other examples where CEOs might spend shareholders' money to further entrench themselves at a corporation, thereby making it more difficult to remove them from the organization. Or the CEOs might simply exert too little effort and discipline when making investments. All of these factors exist within the private sector. However, in the private sector, shareholders can often remove these CEOs, or if the CEO causes the company to perform badly, then incentive compensation means that their compensation is going to decrease relative to what it would otherwise have been. So they bear at least some of the cost. Maybe not enough of the cost, but some of the cost. But if we're looking at politicians, there's simply no accountability. The politicians simply aren't held to account for this. We can see at the moment that Annika Wells' feet are being held to the fire. But we know that this is going to blow over, because we know that by and large, the media is relatively accommodating toward many politicians, particularly those from the ALP. As Bronwyn Bishop argued, if you're a socialist, you can get away with this, but if you're in the Liberal Party, then you'll lose your position, as exactly happened to her. And the underlying issue here is that the media generally hates conservatives, which would include the Liberal Party, One Nation, and the like. So it means that they might pay lip service to holding Labour to account. When push comes to shove, and when it comes to election time, we know exactly what will happen. We know that myriad media outlets will get behind Anthony Albanese and the like, even though we had this expense scandal. It's going to be a whole lot of bluster for nothing. It's going to be sections of the media writing some articles to get clicks. But in the grand scheme of things, when you get to the election time, or when you get to policies that actually matter and that impact us, the media isn't really going to do very much, which is a massive problem. It means the accountability simply isn't there. There's a perception of accountability while politicians are being somewhat held to account over travel RORTS, but that perception of accountability quickly evaporates when it is really needed. Personally, I'm just slightly sad that this travel scandal didn't emerge in the lead up to the capital gains tax review, which is going to be released in 2026, because it is extremely difficult for government to justify hiking taxes when they are spending so profligately on their own rubbish. Their own rubbish that has no viable way, no feasible way, no plausible way of benefiting taxpayers, wasting our money. And politicians are doing this, and it's easy to see that bureaucrats would also be doing the same thing. The travel here is a microcosm of what broadly happens within Parliament. We'd see this in other areas, such as in Victoria, and Victoria is basically just one failed state at the moment. Victoria is in a death spiral, fiscally speaking. But it's not just Victoria. If we look at recent renovations to the Greens Party room in Canberra, well, for one room, I'll emphasize one room, they spent $1.6 million of our money renovating one room. It is insane. How do you spend that much money renovating one room? And it's not even a ballroom or something fancy. It is a room that is described as having 15 leather swivel chairs. A room for 15 people costing $1.6 million. The only way that happens is when people are spending other people's money. In this case, it's bureaucrats and politicians spending our money and wasting it. The travel RORTS are just the tip of the iceberg. They're simply symptomatic and symbolic of what happens when politicians spend our money. So instead of Jim Chalmers trying to find ways to hike taxes, he should be finding ways to cut down on not just waste, but profligate spending that has no plausible way of benefiting taxpayers. So it's not just downsizing the public service, which to some extent does need to be done. It is actually looking at how the money is spent when the public service is given a budget. And I will note that if you are increasing the public service, then you are inherently going to get more of this type of wastage simply by virtue of the fact that there are more people. And as other commentators like Topher Field have noted, it is often beneficial to a manager in the public service to be overseeing more people because it makes them look more important, thereby justifying their own promotion or potentially going into a more high-profile position. And this generates more waste. And the waste here is coming from a team that has too many people in it relative to what it actually needs. So circling back to travel, we can see that Annika Walls has spent way too much money. She's arguing that the expenditure was in parliamentary guidelines. But anyone who's ever done any form of business travel knows full well that you cannot justify $35,000 on airfares, which is exactly what she spent on each of herself and her two other team members to go over to New York. It simply does not pass the sense test. Anyone who has done corporate travel knows full well that would not be acceptable, other than for politicians. And she says that is within guidelines. But that is absolutely insane. It tells us that if it truly is acceptable to spend that amount of money for politicians, then the guidelines have something wrong with them. The guidelines should not permit that type of wasteful spending. So even if Annika Walls did nothing wrong, so to speak, and even if it is the case that her travel expenses were fully within guidelines, then that might absolve her of direct wrongdoing, even though she might be complying with the letter but not the spirit of the regulations. But it begs a deeper question, because it tells us the guidelines are the problem. It's not a couple of bad apples here and there, it is the fundamental system that is enabling politicians to waste our money, and travel is only one way in which this occurs. Still, let me know your thoughts about the travel RORTS in the comments below. Do you think the politicians are simply taking the piss, spending our money willy-nilly in ways that seemingly benefit the politician themselves, but do not benefit us? Or do you think these travel expenses are actually worthwhile? Do you think the $100,000 that Annika Walls and her team spent to go to New York to speak for 6 minutes, do you think that was a good use of money? Do you think the $1 million plus that the E-Karen has spent to go and travel around the world, spruiking our control state, do you think that was a good use of money? Do you think Don Farrell is spending money on these family reunion trips, costing tons of taxpayer money? Do you think that was a good use of money? Do you think any of this travel is a good use of our money? Now, to be clear, I do think that some travel is going to be vital. Annika Walls, being sports minister, does need to travel a bit, for sure. And when she is traveling, particularly international, it makes sense to travel business class. But there are limits. There's a big difference between traveling business class for a large, long-haul international trip and spending $35,000 on those tickets. There's a whole gulf of difference between business class and taking the piss, and that is exactly where things have gone wrong. Still, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. Do you think any of this was justified, or do you think that perhaps the politicians are just wasting our money? Let me know what you think.